Welcome to The Truth. I'm John Gordon. We've got a lot to talk about today. What else is new? But we're going to lead off with Kamala Harris and her flip-flop positions. Now, you know that she ran in 2020 and she violently opposed fracking. If you don't remember, watch this.
Is performing spectacular backflips is energy policy and fracking in particular. The Hill and other media outlets are trying to tell us the Vice President will not seek to ban fracking if she's elected president in 2024, but she's on the record saying she wants to ban fracking.
I am committed to passing a Green New Deal, creating clean jobs, and finally putting an end to fracking once and for all.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. So, yeah, and starting with what we can do on day one around public lands, right? And then there has to be legislation. But yes, and this is something I've taken on in California. I have a history of working on this issue.
So what's she going to say next? You know, the debate's coming up on September the 10th with ABC. We'll talk about that some more in a minute. But what do you suppose she's going to say when it comes to our energy policies, oil, and fracking? I predict that she is going to come out and say, drill, baby, drill. It wouldn't surprise me. Similarly, you know that she has violently opposed the wall on our southern border. And she, as a member of the Biden administration, has not fulfilled her promise of being the border czar. Instead, they've opened the door wide open and said, come on in. Well, this seems to be a pretty dramatic change of policy.
It's that vilifies immigrants, that wants to build what I call his vanity project, a multi-billion-dollar wall, which, by the way, will never get built. You cannot hold the American people hostage over your vanity project. On the subject of transnational gangs, let's be perfectly clear. The president's medieval vanity project is not going to stop them. The president at this point is holding the American people hostage over his vanity project. It's absolutely the height of irresponsibility that this administration is holding them and the American public hostage over the president's vanity project. Because I was a prosecutor for many years, including the Attorney General of California. I specialize on transnational criminal organizations. Yeah. That wall ain't gonna stop them. We don't need a multi-billion-dollar wall. That wall ain't gonna stop them. Let me be very clear. I'm not gonna vote for a wall under any circumstances.
Those were pretty definitive statements, don't you think? Going to be kind of hard to walk it back, isn't it? Well, don't let the facts get in your way. Here's what Kamala is now saying. She said it on national television at the DNC National Convention 2 weeks ago.
Politics with our security, and here is my pledge to you. As president, I will bring back the bipartisan border security bill that he killed, and I will sign it into law.
So now she is going to build the wall. You know, do they ever look in the mirror? Do they ever stop and think about the consequences of what they are saying? So it looks like the Federal Reserve has been determined to put this country into a recession. They may be finally on the verge of getting their way. First, let's look at this. Last week, the Department of Labor revised their unemployment numbers. What we found is that there are 818,000 fewer jobs that were created last year in the last 12 months than they have told us. Now, they either made a mistake or they lied. There's not much middle ground in between those two options that I can really think of. They either made a mistake or they lied. I'll leave it to you to determine what. But here are very significant statistics about the loss of jobs in this country over the last 12 months. Professional and business services are down 358,000 jobs. Leisure and hospitality, which we've been told all along, has made a dramatic turnaround and comeback. Well, that segment lost 150,000 jobs. Manufacturing is only down 115,000. That is only unless you happen to work in manufacturing. Trade, transportation, utilities down 104,000, and retail trade down 129,000. The only bright spots are private education and health services, and transportation and warehousing. They have increased job counts by 87,000 and 56,000 respectively, and those statistics are straight from the Labor Department and their revision of the labor estimates. Now, here is what I consider to be the unforgivable. This statistic really gets me going. People who lost their jobs in the United States that were born in the United States are 1.2 million in the last year. Those who have found employment are up 1.27 million, and those are people that were born outside of the United States. Here's the question I want you to answer for me. Why would a single black person vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz? 1.2 million people lost their jobs. They were people born in the United States. 1.27 people got employment, and they were born outside of the United States. Now, you know those jobs that were lost are largely low-income jobs. A lot of those are being performed by members of the black community, the Hispanic community, those people who have been here for a long time and who have been contributing members to our society, some for as many as 15 and 20 years. Many who paid taxes and many who came here legally. Many who came here illegally don't pay taxes, but nevertheless work. So it's a pretty disappointing picture. And now the Federal Reserve is going to ease interest rates. We're expecting at least 1/4 point in interest rate relief in September, maybe 1/2 point. I think that decision will hinge on what the economic data looks like in mid-September, when they're going to be making the decision on how much interest rate relief to be affording us. But long-term rates in the U.S. Treasuries are ticking down. So, there's this inversion curve where short-term rates pay more than long-term rates. Long-term rates are rationalizing and they're coming down. That's good news. So there is relief on the way. But meanwhile, we have racked up under the Biden administration and presidents before him, including Donald Trump and George Bush and Barack Obama. The last time we had a balanced budget was under Bill Clinton. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I liked Bill Clinton. I thought he was an excellent president. I didn't think that he was a very good leader, thanks to his admissions about his escapades with an intern. But to me, it was not a relevant factor in my determination of assessing his presidency. We had peace abroad. We had declining crime rates. We had full employment. We had a balanced budget. We had no inflation to speak of. The world was in a pretty good place. And we had the internet phenomenon that really helped his time in office. But regardless, since George W. Bush, and the debt prior to Clinton coming into office, we have amassed $35 trillion in national debt. $35 trillion. That is $103,000 per U.S. citizen of debt. Now, if you assess that or assign that debt to the taxpayers, it's $267,000 per taxpayer. Who could vote for Kamala Harris? They have added, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, $7 trillion in debt. Now she wants to eliminate tax on tips. What an original idea. And she wants to build the wall. What an original idea. And she will not oppose fracking, according to her campaign. What an original idea. I predict that at the debate, she will come out in a red silk tie and a Make America Great Again hat. Don't be fooled. Don't be suckered in. How is she going to pay for no tax on tips? How is she going to pay for a $6,000 child tax credit? How is she going to pay for forgiveness of school debt? Oh, I'll tell you how she's going to pay for it. No, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to repeat what she's told you. She's going to pay for it by a 28% corporate tax rate, up from 20%, 21% that Donald Trump reduced the corporate tax rate to. She's going to pay for it with an increase of the capital gains tax from the current 20% to 44.6%. Now, here is why she is Comrade Kamala. She is going to tax your unrealized gains. So if you have money in the stock market, maybe you bought stock in your teens or 20s, and you're now in your 40s or 50s, and your stocks over 20 or 30 years should have doubled, if not tripled. I mean, if you invest wisely and you hold long term, you should receive a double of your worth every 7 years. So you just do the number, but I'm saying that most people don't discipline themselves to invest for the long term, and they may not bat a perfect score. So let's just say that you double every 10 years. $1 million saved and invested in your 20s should now be worth $3 or $4 million. Well, guess what? She is going to take 25% of that. 25% of your gains is what she's going to tax. If that isn't communism, I don't know what is. More communism? She is going to impose tax price controls on grocery stores because she's saying that the grocery distributors, the food distributors, are too big and there are not enough of them and there's not enough competition. Well, I saw a very good interview from Stu Leonard, who has been in the food distribution business for the last 30 or 40 years, his father before him, and John Casamatias, who is in New York. He is in the food distribution business, and they both have said that in the best of times, their pre-tax profit is somewhere around 2%. And she, Comrade Kamala, is going to impose price controls. Wrong answer. If you're going to impose price controls, that is de facto communism. There's a better way. Invite competition. That's what capitalism does. And if the food distributors have gotten too big, then bring the antitrust arm of the government to bear. Break them up. That's what we did with Ma Bell when it got to be too big. They broke up Ma Bell, and now we're putting it back together again. What's the wisdom in that? All right. So that's going to all produce interesting fodder for the debate that comes up on September the 10th on ABC television. Comrade Kamala refuses to debate Trump on any other network, including CNN. They are too fair for her, I guess. You know, ABC, the network that George Stephanopoulos works at, the network that Donna Brazile works at. Donna Brazile, you may remember, is the individual who gave Clinton the questions that she was going to be asked during her debate against Trump. Donna Brazile fed the questions to Hillary Clinton before the debate. And now this is the only network that Kamala Harris will go on. Not CBS, not NBC, not CNN, not Fox, exclusively on ABC. And now she wants to change the rules. In Georgia, Brian Kemp is trying to play nice with Donald Trump. Former President Trump went to Atlanta 3 weeks ago and had a rally at Georgia State University where they excluded a large number of people from being able to come into to the venue. They said, oh, the fire marshal won't permit it. Well, what does the fire marshal say during a Georgia State basketball game when every seat is filled? It was shenanigans. You know it, and I know it. But when President Trump went there, he was very critical of Brian Kemp. As you know, they have not been friends, and they've had a little battle going back to 2020 and even before, when Brian Kemp refused to appoint Trump's preference for the United States Senate. So Trump wanted Kemp, who had the power of appointment, by the way, to appoint Doug Collins, who was a Trump ally and who had served in the United States House of Representatives with distinction. He was the ranking minority member on the Judiciary Committee. He stood up to the Dems, and he was a force to be reckoned with. Instead, Kemp appointed his own individual, namely Kelly Loeffler. Kelly's a very nice person. I happen to know her. I happen to have served on a board with her in Atlanta. I have the utmost respect for her. She was not a good candidate for the United States Senate. She had no prior experience in politics, to my knowledge, and she appeared very programmed and robotic during the debates. My wife, who is non-political, said, my gosh, how many times is she going to say that she's a poor farm girl from Iowa? But they dressed her up in pigtails and polka-dotted shirts. To me, and I like Kelly. She's probably not going to like me after this, but I'm just going to tell you the way it is. She's a public figure. I have a radio program where I speak the truth and talk about political current events and try and give you the backstory. But Kelly Loeffler, of all the people that had filled out an application for consideration, was one of the weaker people. And we lost a United States Senate seat. Now, after that experience, Kelly's gotten much better. But I saw her in her office a month after she lost the Senate race, and she came into the conference room, and she was in a beautiful blue suit with a single strand of pearls and a very expensive ink pen, and she looked like a United States senator. I thought to myself, where'd the pigtails and the polka dot shirt go? You know, when President Trump goes to the factory, he does not put on a pair of coveralls. He wears his suit and his tie. And what does that convey? It conveys to me that he is genuine. He is being who he is. And I know for a fact that his handlers are not able to influence Donald Trump if he doesn't intuitively agree. He is going to be his own person. And I have great admiration for that. And when I ran for Attorney General, I had one or two people come up to me and say, oh, John, you got to get your blue jeans, your cowboy boots, and your flannel shirts on, like David Perdue did. Well, I looked at David Perdue. You know, he was the CEO of 3 large companies, I think publicly traded, perhaps at least one of them. And he was a corporate executive, well-educated at Georgia Tech, very polished. And he comes out in a cowboy jacket, denim jacket, and cowboy boots. And it looked as phony as it was. So back to the point. Kemp was mad at Trump because Trump was mad at Kemp over the U.S. Senate appointment of Kelly Loeffler over Doug Collins. Now, I shared President Trump's view that Collins would be a much better appointee. I happen to know Doug, and I'm crazy about Doug. As I said, I know Kelly. I know David Perdue. I like all 3 of them. But Doug Collins would have won that Senate seat, in my opinion. So that started the feud, and then 2020 came along. There was election fraud in Georgia of epic and mammoth proportion. And Donald Trump asked Brian Kemp to do his job and not certify the election, not steal an election, not interfere with an election, but to call a timeout and reconcile the discrepancies, determine with certainty whether there had been material fraud. Then Raffensperger goes on 60 Minutes and says, most secure election in history. What a bunch of baloney. You know, and I know, and Fonnie Willis knows that that election was rigged and stolen. And so Donald Trump was rightfully really mad at Brian Kemp for not stepping up and doing his job. Now, people tell me all the time, don't you like Brian Kemp? You're not nice about Brian Kemp. I will tell you, I think he has been a wonderful governor and maybe the smartest politician I have ever witnessed. He may come off as a country bumpkin, but let me tell you, he is smart and he is shrewd and he really knows how to work it. Now, that's my paradigm, and I think he has been a good governor. But, and here is the windshield wiper. Billy Bob was a good husband and a good father, but he beats his wife. Well, I'm sorry, I think that disqualifies Billy Bob of being a good husband and father. What do you think? Similarly, I think Brian Kemp has been a great governor, but he failed us when we needed him most. And I have a difficult time forgiving him. Now, Trump went to Georgia, went to Atlanta, virtually across the street from the state capitol where Brian Kemp's office is, and he was very uncharitable towards Brian Kemp, and he caught a lot of flack for it. He caught a lot of flack for it because people considered it to be non-gentlemanly and an affront to the Georgia governor. And people say, oh, you need to look forward, not backward. Don't create a split in our party and run the risk of you losing Georgia. Now, here's where it gets really good and where I give Kemp a lot of credit. I think. Maybe yes, maybe no. But stick with me here. So Kemp comes out and says, I'm not going to resort to name calling. The president can say whatever he wants to about me, but I am going to work as hard as I can work to help get Donald Trump elected because the alternative is Kamala Harris. Huge kudos for turning the other cheek and being the bigger man. That's what I want to believe, and I am giving Governor Kemp the benefit of the doubt. But I told you, he's the smartest hen in the house. He is a brilliant politician and a shrewd politician. There could be another explanation. There could be another explanation for Trump's or for Kemp's benevolence towards the former president. Every poll I've looked at for the last 6 months showed Trump leading Biden by 10, and now Kamala by 6. Maybe, just maybe, Kemp knows that the die is cast. There ain't no drop boxes. There's a lot of eyes on the election. Georgia is under a microscope. You may have gotten away with it in 2020 or have chosen to look the other way in 2020. But it's going to be a lot harder to do that in 2024. And I predict that if Trump wins, that anybody who engages in election fraud in 2024, at a minimum 2024, are going to be called on the carpet and may end up going to jail. Now, that's strong deterrent. So maybe our governor has read the tea leaves, realizes that Trump is going to probably win Georgia, and he wants to be on the right side of it. Now, why would he be so honorable? Because you heard it here first, folks. Brian Kemp is running for the United States Senate in 2026. Mark my word. So that means that if Trump wins by the landslide that some people predict, and we won't really know that until after September the 10th. I'll talk about that in just a second. But if he wins by the landslide that people predict, he needs Trump to back him in his Senate race in 2026. It will all but assure Kemp's waltz to victory. He will return Jon Ossoff to the life of, I'm not going to say it. To me, Jon Ossoff is an empty suit. How he ever got to be United States Senator with zero accomplishment and no CV is a miracle to me. I think he will be easy pickings in 2026, at least to the extent that George Soros doesn't come and meddle again. But that's going to be hard against Kemp. Kemp is going to be a formidable candidate for the United States Senate. And if he has President Trump's endorsement, he will win by a margin like Ron DeSantis did in Florida for DeSantis' reelection. All right, so that's my take on it. Now, why am I hedging? Why am I not just willing to go all in with this love fest, this new love fest between Trump and Kemp? Very simply, Governor Kemp appears to have two sides to his mouth. I want to make nice. I'm going to do everything I can to get Trump reelected. I'm going to turn over my entire ground game in Georgia for the president's benefit. And without Green, he can't win Georgia. That translates into money. So Kemp is saying that he is going to raise money for Trump. In fact, he's holding a fundraiser for Trump this weekend. So he is clearly wanting to get back into Trump's good graces. But once again, when Kemp has an opportunity to right the wrong of 2020, what does he do? So you may be following the Georgia Elections Board, which has by a vote of 3-2 imposed election interference rules. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say that? No. They have imposed election integrity rules. They have made it more difficult to cheat. And what has our governor done? He has asked Chris Do-Nothing Carr, my former opponent for Attorney General of Georgia, who won by a landslide. Some people don't believe that. I don't question it. I'm not a spoiled sport. He won. I didn't. I'm not still after him as a candidate. I don't have any axe to grind. I really don't. I have no regrets about my race, and I have no animosity towards Chris Carr, the person. I have a lot of problems with him as Chris Carr, the Attorney General. A lot of issues. I mean, a ton of issues. We can start with 2020. We can wrap up the fact that he has made a mockery. I mean, a mockery of Georgia's Open Records Act. And I know him to not be a truthful person. He has lied to my face, and he has lied about me. And I can tell you that I never said one thing untruthful about Chris Carr. All right? So that's the man he is. That's the man I perceive him to be. But now Kemp has gone to Carr and said, tell me, do I have the power to remove the State Board of Elections members? Now, you want to talk about election interference? That is election interference. That is why I am not willing to forgive Brian Kemp, and that is why I am not willing to believe in his newfound love for Donald Trump. Because if he was really true to who he says he is, you know, this is a governor who wrote a letter to Brad Raffensperger that said that he had become aware of significant election improprieties, or I guess really he said, I can't remember the exact words that he wrote. I read the letter. It's been about 2 years ago, but election concerns, election anomalies that need to be investigated. He wrote that letter to Raffensperger. Now, when he wrote that letter, I considered it window dressing. I considered it to be nothing more than a false flag, because he's saying, on the one hand, here I got this information that maybe there were some serious things to look into in 2020. I think you should. I'd like a report back to my office. Do you think he ever got a report back to his office? Do you think that you asked the perpetrator of the crime to investigate himself and to give you a report back? Why did Kemp not send that letter to the head of the GBI if he really wanted answers? If it was really a genuine letter, if it was really a inquiry made in good faith, why not send it to the GBI and ask them to investigate? Or why not send it to the Attorney General and ask him to open an investigation, just as I promised that I would do if I were elected Attorney General? None of that happened. None of that happened. And so now Kemp is saying to Mr. Do-Nothing Carr, do I have the power to remove the Georgia Board of Elections members? That's where I'm coming from, folks. That's why Billy Bob's a great husband, except for he beats his wife. Brian Kemp is a great governor, except he failed us when we needed him most. And now that the Georgia Elections Board is actually putting election integrity rules in place, Kemp wants to know if he has the power to remove them. I'm sorry. I was born on the Nat line. I'm just a South Georgia guy that they had to practically burn the schoolhouse down to get me out of high school. Guilty as charged. But I'm not an idiot. And I can see things for what they are. And folks, I've got real questions about Brian Kemp's sincerity to back Donald Trump. Now, we'll see what he does. And I think that he will probably be a positive force in the 2024 elections if we can have a fair, honest election. And that's what I worry about. But if I had to place a bet, I'd say that Kemp is going to do what he promised. He's going to raise money for Trump. He will engage his ground game for Trump. And Governor, sincerely, thank you for that. Regardless of your motives, thank you. Thank you for that. I find it very difficult not to like Brian Kemp. I know him. I've spent time with him. I worked for his campaign in 2018. I worked hard. I gave money. I raised money. I liked him. I still like him. But I've got some serious questions about his sincerity. And we'll find out. And I am telling you right now, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. And I hope that he proves me dead wrong. And I will be the first person to come back here and give him credit and say that I'm saying right now that I think he's going to do this. But the asterisk is, why does he want to remove the state elections board when they are the only ones who have done anything substantive in government to bring about a fair, free election in 2024? And it's my biggest worry, folks. It is legitimately, no, I take that back. It's my second biggest worry. Let me tell you what my first biggest worry is. On July the 13th, in Butler, Pennsylvania, we are told that a lone assassin took a shot at Donald Trump, resulting in him getting hit in the ear. Nothing new there. You know it. I also promised you that following week that I was not going to give this up. I was not going to go quietly. I was not going to do what the mainstream media and the Dems and maybe even members of our own Republican Party in the Congress, some of them, most of them, seem to want this to die on the vine and go away. I'm not going to give it up. I'm not going to let go of it, and I'll tell you why. There are so many things that smell to high heaven, and I'm going to tell you what I see. Now, some of these you've heard before, and I'm going to repeat them. But some of these are new that I have just recently discovered. So we know Christopher Wray's statement, I'm not even sure if President Trump got hit by a bullet. Maybe it was just shrapnel or maybe glass from the teleprompter. Why would the head of the FBI say that just in the days immediately following the attempted assassination on President Trump? What would lead him to say that? It felt to me that he was marginalizing President Trump, that he was downplaying what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania. And I'm telling you, folks, it was by a millimeter or two that he would have any opportunity to downplay it. Because you know and I know and everybody that has watched that unfold know that President Trump came within a hair of losing his life. Again, like Kennedy, except this time it would have been live television. And I pray every night, and I thank God for saving our president. I do. I also thank God for all the benefits that he's given me, one of which is to be born and raised in this country and having been able to live the American dream. I want it to continue for my children and my one so far grandchild. Helen and I hope to have more, but we ain't got no say over that one. All right, so let's talk about the things that stink to high heaven about the assassination. Number one, did you see the video of law enforcement hosing off the AGR building just in the hours after the attempted assassination? They hosed off the crime scene. There is not a law enforcement officer in the world that would have condoned that. I think it was intentional. I think it was destruction of evidence. Now, I'm going somewhere with this. Don't leave me. Don't lose me. Stick with me on this one because it's important. I mean, it is damned important. All right. That's first and foremost. They cleaned the crime scene. In other words, they got rid of the shooter's bodily fluid and matter. They eliminated the possibility of anyone checking the DNA of the alleged shooter. Number two, the crime scene was released after 3 days. Now that strikes me as an inordinately short period of time in what could have been a national tragedy. And it was a national tragedy. It was a tragedy of epic proportion because it's not supposed to happen in America. It is prohibited in our country, under our laws, under our culture, under our God, to try and take the life of another human being. But it happened. And we don't know the facts. We do not know the facts. Like, why was the evidence removed? And then why was the crime scene, why was all the yellow tape taken away within 3 days of the assassination? Why was Thomas Matthew Crooks' body released after 10 days on the same day that the Congress announced a commission to investigate the attempted assassination? Why was Crooks' body released to the parents for cremation? No DNA. They hosed that off, scrubbed it down, got rid of it. The body was released and cremated. How convenient. Nobody to exhume. And one state physician performed the autopsy. Where are the pictures? Where is the autopsy report? We deserve to see it and to read it. Now, remember the water tower? It was behind and to the right of the AGR building. And it has been identified as the number one place that there should have been a counter sniper or at least a Secret Service person assigned to that water tower to observe the venue. It was the catbird seat. It was the one place you could go and you would see everything and anything that went on there. But they didn't do it. But guess what? The crime scene has been released, but not the water tower. The water tower continues to be treated as a crime scene. A United States congressman, the chairman of the committee that is investigating the attempted assassination, went there and tried to climb the water tower, and they told him he couldn't. It was not safe. It was after hours. There was no one there. He would have to come back later. We have gone back and looked, and it's still, as the last that we looked, still a restricted area, and it is being preserved as if it were a crime scene. Now, what BS are they going to come out with to defend that decision? Oh, too many people could come out here and climb the water tower. Well, you got to climb it without the benefit of the ladder that is hoisted up 20 or 30 feet above the ground. How are you going to get up there to the ladder to climb the rest of the way up? And it's been unprotected for the last however many decades that the water tower has been there. Like every other water tower in America, there's no police tape or no restrictions around water towers. I mean, I think you'd be an idiot to go climb a water tower, and I don't know anybody that does. And they have those stairs that are removed, so you have to have some way, a tool to lower those stairs to climb the water tower, or you got to bring an awfully long ladder. Oh, I know. You could get Tim Walz's ladder to climb over the wall that Kamala is never going to build, but now she's going to build. All right, I digress. The water tower is still being preserved in the vein of a crime scene. None of the bullet casings have been provided, and to my knowledge, has any independent third party been able to observe them. Now, the first cop that got up on the AGR building said, and you can see it on video, he counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 casings. 30 minutes later, another individual gets up on the rooftop and starts asking about gun casings. And actually, there are 8. There are 5 over here, but 3 over there. I don't know. There are plausible explanations. Some people say Crooks turned on his side to fire the last 5, so they would have gone in a place differently than the first 3. Listen, that's a plausible explanation. I got it. I'll give you that. But give us the casings. Because if we have the casings, the strike point is all going to be in the same place. The profile of those casings are all going to have the same scars and marks because they came out of the same AK-47. Now, it gets more dicey. Crooks's parents, Thomas Michael Crooks's parents, called the Butler police that afternoon and said, their son is missing. He's taken his father's rifle, and we're concerned that he might do something. Really? That's what they claim. But they won't let us listen to the tape. That phone call didn't get recorded. Just like none of the Secret Service radio communications got recorded. And consequently, you're unavailable. But the local Butler Police's radio traffic is available, and we've listened to it. And a full 6 minutes before the first bullet was fired, a local law enforcement officer reported there's somebody on the roof. Somebody on the roof. And the local law enforcement sniper that was in the window behind the AGR building and far to the right actually took a picture of Crooks on the ground. I think that was 5 or 6 minutes before, or maybe even more, but it was in the time leading up to it. It was within the hour of when Crooks scaled the roof. So we've got that radio traffic. Why does the Secret Service not record their radio traffic? Of course they do. You know they do. We all know they do. But they've lost it, or they didn't record it that day. And then there's the New York Times photographer who took a picture directly in front of Trump at the exact moments that the shots were fired. And his camera actually captured one of the bullets speeding by the former president. But guess what? You wouldn't have used that lens if you were there to photograph the rally. My producer over here, Q, is a photographer, and he told me as we were preparing this segment, you would never have used a high-speed lens like that unless you were photographing a high-action event. It is improbable that the photojournalist would have had that lens on his camera unless he was there for a reason. All right. Now, here is where it gets really spooky. Do you remember the Umbrella Man in Dealey Plaza? Well, I have identified, no, actually, I did not. I have learned from a YouTube journalist, Zach DeGregorio, whose videos I would commend to you. He publishes under his show is called Wolves in Finance. And Zach gets a little off the chain sometimes, but I tell you, his content is really good. And I listen with a critical ear, and I try and play devil's advocate and poke holes in it. His stuff is really tight. And I think it's very factual. All right, so he's put a clip together that I've watched several times now, and I'm going to share parts of it with you now. But he's identified the 8 or 10 reasons that he doesn't believe that Crooks acted alone, and maybe not maybe he wasn't even the gunman. So you may remember, if your memory is good, that in the moments, hours immediately after the attempted assassination, there was video by on-the-scene journalists that were taken, and there are eyewitnesses who observed a white van being towed away from the site, from the Butler grounds there. And that van was towed away because it contained explosives. The van was titled to a company in Arizona. The company in Arizona, Urich Ammunitions, manufactures ammunition and explosives. Now here's where it gets very interesting. Maxwell Urich is, not sure whether it's present or past tense. He was a young man that approximated Thomas Matthew Crooks' build, stature, facial. You could confuse the two, potentially for being one and the same. Now, I'm not making this up. And for those of you on watching the live stream, and if you're not, jump over there right now. Go over to YouTube Live, Getter Live, or Rumble Live. We're live streaming there as we do every Saturday. We broadcast there just like we do on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Thank you, John Fredericks, for this airtime. And we also live stream on the CD Media 13 digital platforms. They simulcast us on Getter and Rumble on their channels. You can go watch us on their channels as well. And so we're going to show you this footage that Zach DiGregorio put together on Wolves and Finance on YouTube Live. And I'm telling you, folks, this, to me, is the key to blowing this case wide open. Who is or who was Michael Urich? He is the key to this investigation.
What is also odd is the dead body on the roof looks more like Maxwell Urich than it does Thomas Crooks. Just at first glance, you can see a scar on the dead body's ear where he previously had gauges in his ear that were sewn up. Maxwell Urich had gauges in his ear, whereas Thomas Crooks did not. There are also images that look like the dead body has a tattoo on his arm. Maxwell Urich had a tattoo on his arm, whereas Thomas Crooks did not have a tattoo. Some people will say, well, that's just dirt on his arm. I'm sorry, but you don't get dirt on the inside of your elbow. Where did the dirt come from? Was he down on the ground rolling in the dirt before he got up on the roof and shot at Trump? That doesn't make any sense.
Zach DiGregorio has identified Maxwell Urich. Now, here's the part that really is out of the twilight zone. The day after the assassination attempt on President Trump, Maxwell Urich's parents filed a missing persons report. He has not been seen or heard of since July the 13th. Now, that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There are those who believe that it was Maxwell Urich's body on the roof of the AGR building. I'm not saying it was. I'm saying the pictures that were in the video that we just showed make, to me, a very compelling case that the body was that of Maxwell Urich and not Thomas Michael Crooks. So where's Thomas Michael Crooks? I don't know. Either Thomas Michael Crooks was the shooter and he was killed, or Thomas Michael Crooks was the shooter and was not killed, or Thomas Michael Crooks was neither the shooter and was killed, or Maxwell Urich was the shooter and was killed, or was the shooter and was not killed and has made a clean getaway. I don't know. Or maybe Maxwell Urich had nothing to do with it. Maybe he just decided to drive a truck from Arizona to Butler, Pennsylvania, and be there on July the 13th, and they confiscated the van and towed it off, and Maxwell Urich went missing the next day. Or maybe it was Maxwell Urich on that roof, and that's why they hosed off the roof, and that's why we can't collect any DNA, and that's why they cremated the body 10 days after the assassination attempt, and there is no evidence to compare to Thomas Michael Crooks' DNA. I don't know. All I know is that this stinks to its core, and the American people deserve answers. The American people demand answers. I hope we get them. And look, if the narrative proves to be the way that the GBI or the FBI and the Secret Service have relayed it to us, I would actually be relieved. I hope it turns out that Thomas Matthew Crooks was a lone, crazed 20-year-old who acted alone, who had 3 foreign bank accounts, who they said was a Republican. Oh, no, he was tied to a fringe leftist organization in 2018. They can't get the story together, or is it just mass disinformation to confuse us and take our eye off the real ball? I don't know. But someone who may be able to help sort it out is a retired sheriff from the state of Arizona. And he is a political activist. He has run for office, and he has challenged our federal government and taken his case all the way to the Supreme Court, where he won. It is my pleasure to welcome to the truth now Sheriff Richard Mack. He was the sheriff of Graham County, Arizona, which is in the southeastern corner of the state. He is a Second Amendment defender and a political activist. Sheriff Mack, welcome to the truth.
Thank you. Political activist. I probably ought to change that to constitutional activist. But yeah, that definitely involves some politics. But that's the P word. It's become so corrupt now. I don't even like to use it anymore.
Well, I share your concern. I think that's a legitimate observation. So you brought a lawsuit against the federal government in connection with the passage of the Brady Act, which evidently severely limited people's Second Amendment rights. And the federal government was seeking to compel you, as I understand it, to enforce their law that you felt was unconstitutional. Did I summarize it correctly?
That's spot on, man. I'm telling you, it shocked me at the time. And John, quite honestly, it still shocks me today that they had the arrogance and the nerve to do that and send it out to every sheriff in the country. And you know how they sent it out? They had agents of the BATF go to every sheriff's association meeting in every state and hand deliver our marching orders as to what we had to do to obey the federal government in enforcing their gun control laws for them. Yeah.
Well, the model has been turned completely upside down. The Constitution specifically says those rights not specifically delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. And the actors in the federal government, presumably permanent Washington, the deep state, seem to feel like they are singularly in charge of running the show. And to hell with the Constitution. It's their way or the highway, for lack of a better explanation to me. So tell us about the lawsuit that you brought and why you brought it.
First, I brought it because I will not violate my oath for them or anyone else. I took my oath of office seriously. I love the Constitution. The Founding Fathers knew what they were doing when they promulgated the Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights, which was added a couple years later after the first part of the Constitution was announced and disseminated. So first, I'm not going to violate my oath for anyone, especially a corrupt federal government. Secondly, I wanted to defend and protect and preserve the Second Amendment, which the Brady Bill clearly violated. And finally, I wanted to protect the office of sheriff from government overreach. And this bill, our decision, our ruling written by Justice Scalia was actually known as the anti-commandeering ruling. And very appropriate so, because they were trying to commandeer the office of the sheriff, and it would make us accountable and answerable to the federal government instead of the people that elected us. And they threatened to arrest us if we failed to comply. And that's true too. And I can't believe how crazy this was, that they could threaten to arrest someone who's completely out of their jurisdiction, who has absolutely nothing to do with them except maybe reporting crime stats to the FBI. And it made our constitutional republic stand on its head. And every facet of it I could not take. But those three main things: I won't violate my oath, I will protect the Second Amendment, and I will defend the office of sheriff. And we did all three, and we won.
Well, God love you, and I appreciate what you have done. So where does the Brady Act stand now? As I understood it, weren't there a series of legislative acts over a number of years that really, when you zoomed out, were just designed to deprive people or water down their Second Amendment rights?
It wasn't going to just water it down. It was going to completely destroy it. So there were Brady bills. We fought, and I was the first sheriff to start all this, and I'm proud to brag of that. You know, I love that I did that. But I also love the person who gave me the inspiration for it, the good Lord and my wife. And if it hadn't been for both of them, this would have never happened. And so Brady Bill 2 was introduced by Howard Metzenbaum from New York just 2 weeks after I filed. On February 28, 1994, he introduced Brady Bill 2 on March 14, 1994. And so we found out, we did a lot of searching, and the Gun Owners of America started checking into it, and they found that there were 5 bills waiting. And yes, it would have completely regulated FFLs, or gun shop owners, out of existence. It would have completely regulated gun shows out of existence. It would have regulated ammunition out of existence, and regulated most guns out of existence. And so, yes, it was going to completely gut the Second Amendment, not just water it down, but completely gut it.
So we see attempts to deprive people of their civil liberties and their rights under the Constitution. We see efforts to censor people and deprive them of their First Amendment rights. We saw a 2020 election, and nowhere in the country was it more evident than in Arizona, in my own home state of Georgia, that an election was stolen and people's vote was they were deprived of their franchise. Where do you see this coming from? I mean, these have got to be pretty powerful forces that are able to pull this stuff off and basically, as Obama said, change the fabric of America. Is that where it's coming from?
It's followed a long train. But I will tell you, the abuses really accelerated immensely during COVID-19. And I think the powers that be, even if it's just our corrupt government and the corrupt deep state of Washington, D.C., and it doesn't go any more sinister than that or more conspiratorial than that, they learned that they could get away with anything. They learned on 2024 or 2020 and 2022 that they could get away with election fraud and stealing our vote. They also learned starting in 2021, maybe the very beginning of it, maybe 2019, that we would just fall in line and bow down and kiss the ring of the wonderful government that was saving us from this horrible COVID-19 and coronavirus, whatever they wanted to call it at the time. And Scalia, in this decision, addresses all of that. And this came out June of 1997. And he said this, in this decision now, folks, there it is. You need to get copies of this. Every one of you should get a copy of this off our website, cspoa.org, cspoa.org. And there's no markup in this. This thing costs $2. You can get 3 of them for $5. I'm not making money off of this, folks. I want you to have it. It's the most important 10th Amendment decision in the history of America, and one of the most powerful cases ever in the history of the Supreme Court. So get this, what Scalia says. First, in his introduction, he said that the question presented by the CLEOs, he called us the chief law enforcement officer, the CLEO, chief law enforcement officers. That's what he called the sheriffs. And he said, must be sought in historical understanding and perspective. Oh, that's exactly what he does. He takes us through a history lesson. He quotes the founders. He quotes the Federalist Papers. He quotes the Federalist Papers. When was the last time that happened in any Supreme Court decision? Or that they just take us through a history lesson instead of trying to create something new according to political correctness of the day. And so he said this, and this is Federalist 51. Hence, a double security arises to the rights of the people. Let me pause there and ask a question. How does a double security arise to the rights of the people? Continuing, quote, the different governments will control each other. At the same time that each will be controlled by itself. Any question, folks, as to whether or not the federal government will control itself? Then the other governments, no matter where they are or who they are, in the other branches of government, that's why we have 3 branches of government, so that we'll keep each other in check and keep each other in our proper lane of traffic, or just proper lanes. So it's our job as other governments, when we see criminal activity within another branch of government, that we correct it. Now, get this one. We have held, however, this is another quote from this decision, we have held, however, that state legislatures are not subject to federal direction. Folks, you know why we're not? Because the states formed the federal government, not the other way around. Historically speaking, they are our servant. They were our creation. And we delegated a few discrete enumerated powers to them. In fact, Scalia says that in here too. Right here on page 7 of this little, most powerful book in the world, folks, he says, conferred upon Congress of not all governmental powers. Well, if they don't have all governmental powers like they pretend they have, what kind do they have? Scalia answers, but only discrete enumerated ones. Well, how do we keep it that way? What is our job in keeping the powers of the federal government discrete enumerated, or in other words, discrete limited? He says this, to keep it that way, quote, which implication was rendered expressed by the 10th Amendment. Folks, the states have to enforce the 10th Amendment. We have to tell the federal government, you can't do that. You don't have any authority. And by the way, John, while we're on this subject, I've actually gone through the Constitution, and I wanted to enumerate or number the powers that were delegated to the federal government relative to law enforcement. So my question to all of you right now, how many law enforcement powers were delegated to the new central government? Most people say 0. It's not 0. It's almost 0. It's 5. 1, treason. The federal government's supposed to be enforcing and investigating and punishing treason. Next one, counterfeiting. Next one, felonies committed on the high seas or piracies. Next one, Article 4, Section 4. The United States shall protect our borders from invasion. And then number 5 is violations of international laws or treaties. That's it. So as you quoted in the 10th Amendment, the powers not delegated to the federal government belong to the states or the people. They belong right here. They belong with us. And so this is so obvious. Our job in the states to protect the civil rights of the American people that the federal government habitually and routinely violate every day.
Well, that is a very good civics lesson, and I appreciate your educating us about that. And it seems like the model has been turned upside down, and I don't know how we get it back. But one of those powers is to protect our border. And you're right there in the midst of the biggest border crisis that this country has ever experienced. What do you think is going on? Why is the Biden administration opening the borders and allowing these very dangerous, law-breaking, and President Trump alleges crazy people to come into our country? What possible advantage could that have for our country?
They are willing to sacrifice national security for their political monopoly. And as you already know, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens voted in 2020 and 2022. Now they've quadrupled that amount, and they've continued to get these illegal aliens on the Democrat rolls to vote. That is why they have done it. They were willing to risk national security because we know for a fact that tens of thousands of international terrorists from the Middle East have also infiltrated our country, along with the Latin American population south of Mexico, south of the Mexico border. They're willing to do that in order to gain complete control and power from Hawaii to Bangor, Maine. That is why they did this. They were willing to sacrifice all of this, and including sacrifice the presidency of Joe Biden, because they knew people didn't like him anyway. They knew he was old. They knew he was incapable of continuing as president. He said he would only be with it one term, but his pride and arrogance got a hold of him, and he wanted to stay again. He's mad at the Democrats for kicking him out, even right now. But the reason they set all that up through Joe Biden is so that he could be the sacrificial lamb, so that people would get mad for a while, and then they would turn to someone else, and that someone else now also did this. But they've all seen that they got away with it, and so that's now why they think Kamala can win, even when we all know she's not qualified, and she's been a horrible vice president of the worst president in American history, and that's Joe Biden. But as they said in that criminal investigation on Biden, he is not mentally competent to stand trial. And I have said that actually for the last 5 years.
As have I. But in addition to his mental capacity, I prefer to actually focus on his corruption. Here's a guy who he and his family, he's made his son the bag man, have collected $30 to $60 million that we know of from our enemies, not foreign actors, but our enemies. And the fact that they're allowing him to get away with it scot-free just shocks my conscience. And I just fundamentally don't understand it unless there's a nod and a wink that, oh, he served the country for 50 years, let's give him a retirement plan. I don't know. That's the best spin I can put on it. But there's certainly no authority or legitimacy behind that if that is, in fact, the case.
Yeah. But that is why they've done it. And then after they get in, they know they can get away with anything because they're going to control, pretty much as they do right now, the courts and most of the legislatures and most of the executive branch. So our only hope is that the sheriffs of this country will stand against all of this, start investigating this criminal and treasonous activities, and start erecting the barriers, as Madison warned us, county by county. There is no hope in Washington, D.C. That is never going to change. The likelihood of Washington ever changing is not going to happen. But the sheriffs can erect the barriers and make the federal government irrelevant in our counties.
Well, I ran for Attorney General of Georgia 2 years ago, and I don't believe that I've participated in an honest, fair election, although I've never cried foul, accepted the results, and moved on. But I'm 100% sure in my heart and in my brain, based on the evidence that I've seen, that 2020 was stolen in Georgia without question. There are 3,200 duplicate ballots on the Secretary of State's own website. Then there are 14,000 people who were registered to vote, and if you alphabetize them by their first name, their voter IDs are perfectly sequential, which is impossible to have happened. Then there are some 300,000 missing ballot images. Yet our Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, and our governor says there's nothing to see here. And just as the state elections board really in Georgia has started to display a conscience and have imposed rules for the 2024 election, empowering local elections officials to deep dive into an election that does not appear on its face to be worthy of certifying. If there are irregularities, that they have a timeout to sort it out before certifying the election. Now, our Governor Kemp, who says that he's for Donald Trump now, is seeking authority from the Attorney General to determine if he can remove the members of the state elections board. So it just seems to me that anytime you make progress on election reform in the name of elections integrity, that these people find a way to eradicate it, which to me is just them saying, we're going to steal the election and there's nothing you can do about it. Have I got that wrong?
I've said that exact quote. They have done everything in their power, everything. Kemp, everyone in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and a few other states, but all the swing states, they've done everything in those states to guarantee the probability and the possibility of cheating. That's it. That's all they've done the last 4 years.
So it's my belief that Donald Trump, along with Robert Kennedy Jr. and Elon Musk and Tulsi Gabbard, may actually be our salvation. Do you think that we've got a chance to get it across the line?
Only if the cheaters allow it. And I say that for a reason. I believe that the cheaters may want Trump back in so that they can have the violence and dash the beginning of civil war, because the violence won't stop. They're going to blame Trump for it. And it's going to paralyze our nation. And I think they want that. They've been wanting to promote violence. They've been promoting violence for a long time. The left doesn't care if the left commits violence. And I think that's one of the possibilities. Another intel report that we've received is that Hamas and other international terrorists that have already infiltrated our country because of the Biden and Harris policies, they're going to attack from within on October 7th to commemorate the Palestinian, what they call genocide of 1 year ago. These people committed these murders and tortured and burned children alive, and yet turned around and blamed it on Israel. And I don't care where violence comes from. I denounce every bit of it. If Israel's done anything like that, I denounce what they have done. But I know for a fact Hamas was involved, and Hamas already took hostages, refuses to get them back, and now Israel just got one released, and I'm for all that. But if they cannot settle their disputes without killing and maiming and torturing children, then I will never support any of their claims of Israel's being mean to us.
I've said several times that I feel that the Palestinians have been abused. They have been mistreated historically. But here's the problem that I have. When you behead children and you kill pregnant women and you murder 200 people at a pop concert, you deprive yourself of any sympathy or any voice to be heard. And so I do think that there's probably another side to the story, but they deprive us of any sympathy extending towards the Palestinians. So, I mean, that's just my take, and for whatever it's worth. Now, you are a seasoned law enforcement officer, and a really good one at that. And I have been a student of JFK's assassination for 60 years after I was home from the fourth grade with the flu on November 22nd, 1963. I know that assassination inside and out, and most of the people that were in Dealey Plaza, most of the people that were suspected of being in Dealey Plaza, the gunman, and et cetera, et cetera. I've concluded, as scholars have, based on my reading, not my information, but on people like David Talbot and MacArthur, who wrote The Unspeakable, that the CIA killed Kennedy. I see such striking resemblances and parallels between the Kennedy assassination and the attempt on President Trump's life on July the 13th, just barely 2 months ago. Do you share my observations?
Yes, yes. And I've studied the JFK assassination quite a bit too. In fact, I've been to Dealey Plaza, as probably you have, to look it all over. And first of all, I felt it was eerie because it looked exactly like, it was in mint condition like you see it on the movies.
They have preserved it very well.
It's very preserved. And I went behind the picket fence and read the graffiti back there and all that. It was almost spooky, but we also went up into the museums and saw the magic bullet that went through Connolly and came out in pristine shape and all this. I have come to the conclusion, I want to see if you do, that Oswald never even fired a shot.
I don't even think he was in the sniper's nest. There are witnesses who saw him in the break room 5 minutes before the first shot was fired, and the manager of the school book depository rushed through the break room with a Dallas police officer who turned and looked at Oswald and said, "Who is that?" And the manager said, "Oh, he works for us." He was sitting in the same seat drinking the same Coca-Cola, and I just don't think, and he was not out of breath. So,
yeah, he wouldn't have had time. He wouldn't have had time to run 5 floors.
Yeah, I think he was exactly what he said he was, and that was a patsy, and that he was set up to take the fall. Now, do you know about this story about the Arizona Munitions Company, and that there was a white van in Butler on July the 13th, and there are videos showing the van being towed away, and it was reportedly full of explosives. And the van was titled to an Arizona company. And I'm sorry, I didn't think to get the details explicitly on this before we came on.
I have honestly not seen anything about that.
Okay, well, I'm going to email you a YouTube video that you can watch that lays it out. There is actual video of the van. I remember distinctly hearing reports about the van in the hours immediately after the attempted assassination. But this kid who drove the van from Arizona to Butler is the son of the owner of the munitions company in Arizona. And guess what? His parents filed a missing persons report the day after Butler, and he has not been seen or heard from since. Now, that's not a conspiracy theory. That is hard, cold fact based on what I have read and what has been reported. And to me, that is maybe the most significant and important fact that needs to be looked at.
Well, even Crooks, the guy who was up on the roof, that the Secret Service totally ignored, even after they were warned about him, they totally ignored it. But he even said in a video it's still out there, "You got the wrong guy." He's making that statement. Like he's challenging us. "You stupids, you think it was me, or you think it was just me? You've got the wrong guy." If the suspect is saying that in a dying declaration of what was really going on, you've heard none of the follow-up on that.
This kid from Arizona that drove the van, he looks a lot like Crooks. He has long blonde hair, and this video I'm going to send you has pictures of the mystery man that I'm talking about pictured next to Crooks, not in the same picture, but they've taken the picture of the guy and the picture of Crooks and put them together. They look very similar to one another, but they also put Crooks on the roof after he had been shot. And the suggestion is that the guy that they killed is not Crooks, but it's this kid from Arizona. I'm going to send it to you.
I didn't think Crooks looked like his younger pictures. the guy that was on the roof, he doesn't look like his younger pictures. And I commented about that. So, yeah. So another thing is, I will tell you 100%, Marilyn Monroe did not commit suicide, neither did Epstein, and neither did Vince Foster. No way on all three. For sure, the most evidence is Marilyn Monroe. She did not commit suicide. So there's a lot of these conspiracy theories that you start delving into them, they're very factual. But I will tell you, I know for a fact that the sheriffs have stood against the federal government. They can continue to stand against the federal government. And if we get 1,000 sheriffs to stand unitedly against the incursions and criminal activity of the federal government, we can keep them at bay. And I know for a fact that the federal bureaucracies do not want to fight with the sheriffs. If we could just get the sheriffs to unite in that, we could protect the people from the rest of this.
I encourage some sheriffs in Georgia to go investigate 2020 and go seize the ballots because they are evidence of a crime having been committed, especially in Fulton County.
We've pushed that as well.
I didn't seem to make much progress on it. So coming up in just a few days, actually, September the 6th and 7th, you are convening a summit of law enforcement officers as well as opinion leaders and scholars in Orlando. Tell us about the Foundation for Freedom Conference coming up in Orlando in just a few weeks.
Well, it's because we think this is such a pivotal time, a crucial time for America. We called this emergency meeting. The public is also welcome because we, the people, have got to be involved in this. And so everyone, you can see the information for this on the front page of cspoa.org, and you can be there.
And we'll put the link up on our site along with this video, and there is the flyer for the meeting, and we'll also put a link in the comments on our podcast. But we're also on the radio, so it's kind of hard for our radio audience to see the flyer. But let's repeat that you can go find it at cspoa.org.
And while you're there, join the CSPOA posse. Join the posse, become a part of the solution, and help us help you and train you to work with your sheriff and create a posse for him.
Sheriff Richard Mack, thank you so much for joining The Truth today, and we really have enjoyed our conversation and look forward to many more in the future.
John, I would love to come back with you. You're spot on, man. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be in your company, and thank you for your service, and thank you for what you're doing. Keep fighting. Thank you for joining us on this week's edition. We hope that you enjoyed the program, learn from the program, and will be motivated to help work to keep this country the free land that it is. We've got to straighten this mess out, or our children and grandchildren aren't going to have a country. And that's my biggest fear. This is The Truth. I'm John Gordon. I've told you the truth, and I'll be back next Saturday with another edition of our program, and we will be coming to you from New York City. And we might just make a pass by the Roosevelt Hotel and see what it looks like a year after we were visited there last. Have a great weekend, everybody.